Hi, this is David Horton, Director of Learning Networks at the Core Collaborative. This is part 1 of 3 in the Collaborate 3 Easy Steps to Team Transformation, Series 1 Innovative Change Series. For those of you that previously tuned in, there was an introductory session that took place and some materials on the blog that you will want to have access to, and I'll explain more about that as we get further into it. So welcome to this Lunch and Learn session. Very excited to have you on board. Let's get started. So as I mentioned, this is part 1 of 3. It is important that you go back if you have not seen the video of the introductory session and recognize that there are some appendices that you need to have access to. So when we get to the end of this video blog, please check the web link that you can go and find those appendices to take the diagnostics. And then you can move forward with this series as we continue on. So a little bit about that, you can take a look at that quote from Stephen Covey. And it is true, isn't it? When we think about how teams function and as we think about how we deal with such rapid change going on in our environment, that trust really is the thing that's going to hold us all together. It's the thing that holds us together as a team. It's the thing that holds us together in a broader context as a school and so forth. It's a really important ingredient. So how do we foster and build that kind of relational trust? Well, one of those pieces, of course, is through dialogue. As teams have dialogue with one another, they have the actionable pieces to build relational trust. And it's important because we have to be able to not only understand each other, but we get to know one another better through that dialogue. We understand the thoughts, we understand the direction and the intentions of other people. So it can't be underestimated that through dialogue is the main vehicle to building that relational trust. When we think about who does this work and why it's so important, think about the importance of leaders and teams and their ability to collaborate and innovate, their ability to look for and marshal resources together to solve logistical problems, have a positive tone, to be inclusive, to have engagement. All these things are things that teams that function well and have good relational trust do. And it allows them to get to the most important part of why we would put in that effort, and that is to promote student ownership of learning. And teams are the vehicle that can do that the best. So having relational trust and structured dialogue and having teams be functional in that way is the most important thing we can do to build that collective efficacy to get those classrooms operating to support and foster student ownership of learning. So our true goal is to get to that. So when you think about it, then we have to work backwards a bit and say, so where is learning happening for educators in your system? How do we take care of each other and maintain that? So let's think about what learning networks already exist in your school or in your district. So if you are taking time to do this video blog with colleagues, this would be a great time to pause and ask this question of one another, or to have a virtual chat and talk to each other about where those things might happen. So there are 2 levels that these learning networks will take place, right? There's a school level learning network, and we'll talk in a moment about district level learning networks. If you think about a school, there really are 2 kinds of learning networks that we would see. There are grade level and subject area teams, and those would be what we would consider narrow scope. These are very specific. They have very specific tasks and responsibilities. But we also know schools sometimes put in place broad scope teams, such as leadership teams, or department chair teams, or assessment teams, or accreditation teams. So these are more school-wide focused teams. They're more broad in their scope. So when you think about this, it's an important thing to think about which kind of team are we? And so therefore, what are our responsibilities? Clearly, the narrow scope teams have the most um, rapid contact with students, but the broad level teams have a very interesting responsibility to build cohesion across the entire school. So think about this and ask and answer these questions. So at our school, what narrow scope, broad scope teams exist? And most importantly, what are those teams doing to actively build their learning network? So the related question, what is each team learning about? This is a really important thing for each team leader, or for the principal or administrator to ask and answer. It's crucial that we know what teams are learning and that they're being supported in their learning. Think about it at a district level. The same thing is true, right? It also applies. And that is, there are narrow scope and broad scope teams. A narrow scope district team might be when you bring together all the principals from all the schools to represent, and they have a very narrow scope in what they're talking about and learning and discussing. Could be if all the teachers on special assignment get together from all the different schools or the professional development team or whatever, and they come together and talk about it. They have a very narrow scope because they're not trying to solve something that is the entire district. They have a very small piece of that, and they're working to understand it, move the work forward, and get people to understand and support what it is they're working on. So the broad scope district level teams might be those that have responsibility over the entire district. Could be things such as like the superintendent's cabinet, or other such decision-making groups that are looking at an entire district. And they might be thinking very broad in their approach. So if you think about that, for those of you that may be district level leaders on this blog, think about what are your narrow scope and broad scope teams. And so ask and answer this question similar to the schools. What are those teams doing to actively build their network, learning network, and what is each team learning about? So how are they supporting one another? Putting all of this together, though, is where the magic will happen. It's this idea of cohesion. And when we think of district level change, that's very big, isn't it? It's very unwieldy. So thinking about how a district initiative impacts an individual classroom seems very remote, doesn't it? It seems very distant, because getting from this very broad initiative down to the very specific of a classroom, there would be wide variation across a district of medium size, let's say. You could imagine there would be some profound differences as you go from classroom to classroom to classroom. So district level change can be big that way. But it isn't to say that um, the impact of district level initiative doesn't provide leadership and cohesion, because it does. It helps provide that target. It helps set that direction of where everyone is going. But as people start to put together their ability to reach that, there will be a lot of individuality as people put that together. So this idea of cohesion becomes very important, and it creates what some have described as a loose, tight relationship. But the same is true at the school level, isn't it? That there will also be a loose, tight relationship between what the overall direction is and then what each grade level or each department or subject area discipline team does to reach that goal. So we have to have an understanding of what is happening at each of those levels and what their individual responsibility is. So think of this as a coordination question. How are the narrow scope and broad scope teams coordinated in your organization? If you're a school site person, you might ask that and look at our school. How do we know that these teams are coordinated? If you're a district person, you may say, how do we know all of these teams have their coordination? And so the question then would be, what explicit actions are being taken to coordinate the learning across all the teams to harness their collaborative expertise? So there have to be actions that are put in place that each team can understand, that brings out their collaborative abilities and creativity to solve the things in front of them now. So having good communication, having good relational trust is crucial for these teams to be able to do the work that they're being asked to do. So now the real crux of it comes to this, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is this idea of, so what is the most important learning network in the entire organization? And it's really the cornerstone of collective efficacy, and that would be, it's the school level team. It's the narrow scope school level teams, these grade level and subject area teams. So when you think about that, having this alignment for these teams is the most crucial. So any leader in the organization has to understand that that is the learning network that needs the most support and the most effort given so that those teams function at their very best. So the real question for you then would be, how is everyone else in the entire organization supporting grade level and subject area teams? And how do you know that that support is being rendered? How do you know you're receiving it if you're on one of those teams? And then what strengths can be identified in that area? And let's build from those areas of strength. So if you think about making positive change, really innovative change, this becomes really interesting in this time as we think about what's going on out in our world and with the rapid amount of change that's taking place. One of the things that's important about innovative change is that it's asking us, and George Couros asked us this question, how innovative change in schools means that things have to be new and better. So if we think about that, what in your daily world could be made new or better? And it really is then going to come back to, and how do we make things new and better together? So if we, so if we go back and think about this idea then is, and researcher by the last name Biddle Glass describes to us this idea of micro moves, that when teams and educators make micro moves toward the place they want to go as change agent, they are making that positive, innovative change. And there are three things that help us talk about this, these micro moves. One is that we turn toward the unfamiliar, meaning we embrace moving to something that may be different, strange, or new to us. The next is we experience together what's not known. So we can't travel the road alone. We have to travel it with partners and colleagues, and we learn together and we share our insecurities, we share our uncertainties, and we laugh together and we move forward together. And the last is that we convene around new possibilities. We think about what could happen if we did this. What might be the positive if we did this with our students? How might this impact their learning and help them grow and be even better? So as you put it all together, remember this idea, change is the constant. Change is happening to us every day. And as we look at some of these things, for instance, that are going on with all these health-related changes that have been closing schools and forcing us into remote learning, these are all happening, and they may happen rapidly, but it's how do we support each other as we go through those changes? As we turn toward that and look to the possibilities. So we don't look at the things that aren't working, we look at the things we know that can. How do we do that? So putting all that together is this idea of building collective efficacy through relational trust, supporting ourselves and our colleagues to make these things be a positive. And we want to embrace that as we move forward. So take a moment, just consider, so how are you feeling right now about innovative change? What are some things that give you pause? What are some things that may excite you? What are some things that might make you feel like we can do this? And how do you know that you and your colleagues are all moving toward it together? It's very important that we take time to talk about that and think about and support each other in that. So finally, as we move out of this part 1 of 3, is you have to have used the diagnostics from the prior blog. So be sure you go and do those. You're now going to do this. You're going to select 3 areas of focus from each, and you'll use Appendix B that will be referenced in the same location on the web link blog to find that and record what your areas of focus are for learning and conversation. And also remember, if you're doing this as a group, be sure you use those thought questions along the way and even the written blog to talk together and think together. Again, the references and the blog tools, appendices, and diagnostics are found there at www.leadteamlearn.com/blog. And I hope you've enjoyed that. Look forward to learning more with you. These lunch and learn sessions are really powerful and done in small bits. It gives us things to think about. So I hope you enjoy that. Don't forget all the great resources we have with Core Collaborative. You can find us there at our website, thecorecollaborative.com, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and of course on Twitter. If you have any questions, be sure and reach out to me, Dave Horton, at the Core Collaborative, Dave H at thecorecollaborative.com. Thanks so much.